utterly embarrassing. Absolutely god-awful terrible is what it is. Let's go ahead and roll the slideshow, please. The drug use and ideals of the hippie movement fueled the psychedelic art movement. Both were driven by love and passion, but overconsumption and oppressive appropriate actions of the mainstream led to their downfall. Inarguably, the drug culture of the 1960s had a conspicuous effect on the hippie movement. Before the hippie movement, Ken Kesey was augmenting LSD usage through road trips with the Merry Pranksters, a group trying to spread the word of the drug they believed to be the end-all be-all of human existence. LSD was not yet illegal at this time. Many soldiers coming back from Vietnam or who had served in the war in Korea brought addictions to marijuana and heroin back to the mainstream of American society. Drug usage spread rapidly throughout the hippie subculture. One of the early art predecessors to the psychedelic art movement was blotter art. Blotter art was artwork painted on blotter sheets of acid, then perforated into tiny squares or hits. The markings were either something culturally iconic, or just a mark to let people know who had made the drug. Also, there was the materialistic attitude and conservative social conformity that accompanied the 1950s. Add to that mix the war in Vietnam that, as time wore on, less and less U.S. residents supported. Mix those ingredients, pop the concoction in the oven that was the 1960s, and that is how the hippie subculture was baked. Socially, the beatniks became the hippies. Beatniks would often refer to themselves as hip and hipsters, hence the birth of the term hippie. The laid-back, do-nothing beatniks transformed into the iconoclastic hippies. On January 3rd, 1966, two brothers, Ron and Jay Talon, opened the Psychedelic shop in the Haight-Ashbury neighborhood of San Francisco. The shop, which was located directly across the street from the Woolworths that their father owned, was a full-service head shop. 5 days after they opened, an acid test was held 5 blocks away at the Fillmore Auditorium. An acid test was a psychedelic party held by Ken Kesey and the Merry Pranksters. The timing could not have been better. The Psychedelic shop became the place to buy and sell tickets to local events and a place to hang out. Before the Psychedelic shop, one former resident remembers, the only place to hang out was the laundromat. The Psychedelic shop and the Fillmore and Avalon auditoriums all existed in perfect harmony, a trifecta that ushered the transition from the Beat generation to the hippie movement. In 1966, the Psychedelic era hit full steam. In particular, the psychedelic poster artists around Haight-Ashbury, the center of the hippie movement, worked for Bill Graham and Chet Helms, concert promoters at the Fillmore and Avalon auditoriums, the biggest venues of psychedelic music in the area during the era. Bill Graham just wanted the information on his posters, with maybe the name of a hit record. He believed everything else was frivolous. Chet Helms encouraged artistic experimentation. Enter the Berkeley Bonaparte Distribution Agency. The agency was made up of 5 artists who run the gamut from the first psychedelic artist to the most innovative. In 1967, poster artists, pictured from left to right, Alton Kelly, Victor Moscasco, Rick Griffin, Wes Wilson, and Stanley Mouse created the Berkeley Bonaparte Distribution Agency. Wes Wilson designed the first of the psychedelic posters. Born July 15, 1937 as Robert Wesley Wilson in Sacramento, California, he designed the Trips Festival poster, what many consider the earliest psychedelic poster, and one that inspired many who would become psychedelic poster artists. Originally, he had no intentions of becoming an artist. He attended junior college in Auburn, California, studying forestry and horticulture. He later switched his major to philosophy and attended San Francisco State University. Whilst in college, he worked at Contract Printing, a print shop located in owner Bob Cara's basement, and became proficient not just with the camera, but also with layout and drafting. Even with his newfound abilities, Bill Graham and Chet Helms both admitted that they used Wilson originally because he had access to a printing press. While still in college, he attended the Jugendstil and Expressionist art exhibit at the University of California and changed the course of psychedelic poster art history. It was here that he discovered in a catalog the lettering of Viennese secessionist Alfred Roller. Wilson liked the melted letter look. He used Roller's letter forms, exaggerating them beyond what Roller had, and fit them into serpentine lettering forms, a style copied by almost all of the psychedelic artists at some point. Well, Graham once told Wilson of his posters, "It sure is nice, but I can't read it." Wilson replied, "Yeah, and that's why people are going to stop and look at it." He also experimented with vibrant electric colors, audaciously mixing reds, blues, greens, and yellows. Graham and Wilson eventually had a falling out over finances. Wilson aired his grievances in the final 2 posters for Graham. In the second-to-last poster Wilson created for the Fillmore, he created what, in his words, was a conflicted face that represents a house divided, a reference from the New Testament. For his final poster, Wilson says, he created a characterization of Bill Graham, quote, "rich and smug like an antique Roman merchant," unquote. Wes Wilson's design set the style of psychedelic art, capturing the full sensory experience of the festive environment and the visual distortions induced by psychedelic drugs. He abandoned clear, readable design that had been used in the music poster art before for three-dimensional shapes that were twisting and turning with energy. Toward the end of 1966, Wilson began to incorporate the female nude into his works. This bold step paved the way for the sexually open, liberated lifestyle that became associated with the hippies. Alton Kelly and Stanley Mouse Miller achieved their best psychedelic art concomitantly. Born and raised in Detroit, Miller got his nickname Mouse in elementary school because he drew his signature rodent over all of his books and papers. He was kicked out of high school for a graffiti stint gone wrong. After shortchanging high school, he attended Detroit School for Society of Arts and Crafts. He found his abstract painting and life drawing classes absolutely uninspiring. Disappointed almost to the point of leaving the art world altogether, he stumbled across a new tool called the airbrush and became permanently nebulized onto the canvas that is art history. He made a name for himself in the heart of the automotive industry by dint of hot rod graphics. By 25, he'd believed that he had achieved all he could in the field and moved to the heart of the psychedelic scene in the Haight-Ashbury neighborhood. Kelly, however, was introduced to the psychedelic era in 1965 in Virginia City, Nevada, where he had helped other like-minded individuals reanimate the Red Dog Saloon, a former Old West watering hole. The rejuvenation created a venue for psychedelic concerts and events. Born in Houlton, Maine, in an area known for industrialism, he had an early fascination with anything mechanical. Through his life, if he was not working as an artist, he would find work as a mechanic. His mechanical abilities came out in his preferred art form, photo collage. In college, he studied industrial design, and his vehemence for engineering found him eschewing art in favor of a job as an airplane mechanic. Working as an airplane mechanic in Connecticut, specializing in engines and transmissions, he quickly became bored. When he heard of the Cultural Revolution that was happening on the opposite coast, he quickly headed west, landing in Nevada, then in California. Miller met Kelly shortly after Miller arrived in San Francisco. They called themselves kindred spirits. The two would get stoned and wander the streets in the most ridiculous vintage clothing they could find. One of their favorite haunts was the financial district, where they would float aimlessly amongst the sea of suit-and-tie businessmen. Miller returned to Detroit briefly to, in his words, weasel out of the draft. When he returned to San Francisco, it was with the Cadillac hearse displaying a Make Love Not War sticker in the back window. He returned to San Francisco the same night as the Trips Festival. He saw the flyer, designed by Wes Wilson, and was hooked. I was really turned on by the lettering, Miller said in an interview later. The Trips poster is really what inspired me to start doing posters. Kelly and Miller began Mouse Studios right before meeting the rest of the bevy of free spirits that founded the powerhouse Berkeley Bonaparte Distribution Agency. In the Mouse Studio, a converted firehouse in which Janis Joplin frequently rehearsed with Big Brother and the Holding Company, that often host poster-making jams, where artists would work side by side, fueling each other's fires with ideas. Both Kelly and Miller were keenly aware of the power of images, either created or found, and frequently exploited the attraction power of recognizable images. Over time, they became comfortable enough with their mediums to become outrageous, creating images like the Zigzag knockoff that they were sure they would be sued for. In fact, in the bottom left-hand corner of the Zigzag poster, they wrote, "What you don't know about copying and duplicating won't hurt you." Instead of being sued, Zigzag Rolling Paper Company found that the poster actually increased their sales, and they let the copyright laws slide. Miller and Kelly would frequent art museums and libraries looking for inspiration, and borrowed freely from poster artists like Hedrick Cassiers and A.M. Cassandre. They made no excuses for their inspirations. Both were into Art Nouveau graphics, particularly the work of Alphonse Mucha. Once during an interview, someone asked about the similarities between their poster and one of Mucha's. The interviewer said they looked very close, too close in fact to be an actual coincidence. Miller said, "It's no coincidence, we ripped off the image."